During the break, Julie, we were talking a little bit about just the sort of matter of fact that, the doctors just tell you, you have cancer. In your case, 99.9% sure it's cancer. Where do you go with that? How do you process that? And how come it's acceptable that it can be so harsh and the blow can be delivered in that way when somebody is told they have a chronic illness?
I don't know if it's acceptable. So my passion is to improve the lines of communication all the way through the process for not only the patients, but for the physicians and the clinicians. And it starts with, I think, better understanding just the person. My news may have come very matter-of-fact because I'm a very matter-of-fact person. Not all people can accept that. And I have had several friends and known several people in this community who have been tragically affected by just the initial delivery of the news. And when you get the news, you want all the answers at once.
Right then, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's really hard when you get the news and there's no answers or there's no next steps that come along with that. I, as a very strategic business person, am always looking at what's the process then. When you identify what the problem is, what's the process to finding a solution? And I tended to try to put my cancer in this fine little box with a little ribbon on it and drive those questions. But that week was a pretty amazing week. So I went from the physician's office on a Tuesday morning at 7:45 to biopsy on Friday afternoon. And and then the following Thursday having the confirmed results. The really neat thing about the surgeon that I had chose is that she had all the answers.
Really?
Yeah. And a lot of women today in our community don't have access to that scope of services to have all the answers. I would have been tragically affected had I gone from having a diagnosis of breast cancer in a diagnostic way to being put into surgery and not really knowing when I came out what was going to happen. I had the good fortune of having a surgeon who clearly knew what the path was, and I knew all the answers before I chose to have the surgery.
So what was your treatment like?
My treatment was I chose a bilateral mastectomy and with reconstruction, and following that I started chemotherapy. Unfortunately, in the midst of that, I acquired a MRSA, a highly resistant staph infection. So I was put back in the hospital. It was interesting. I had cancer in a very defined box. So the process of my cancer was I was waylaying surgery till after my son's graduation, June 13th, 2008. So the surgery was scheduled for June 27th. I was going to be off for 2 weeks, and then I was going to go back to work, and then I was going to start chemo in October. I was going to have my final reconstruction in November, and by December, it was all tied up in a nice little bow, and it was all finished.
Didn't go that way, did it?
It was anything but that, yeah. But it also made me realize that there's a lot more to life than someone's strategic plan or my little box. I was going back through some notes actually the other day and realizing that 3 weeks after my surgery, I was actually flying to client meetings. And that was prior then to the MRSA infection. So once the MRSA infection affected me in early September, I was finished working. So from then, I haven't worked. I've done a lot of volunteer work and a little consulting work.
Yeah. So your life, I guess, post-cancer, you're a grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Your daughter has a 9-month-old?
A 9-month-old. My 29-year-old daughter has a 9-month-old.
Wow.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Serving in the U.S. Air Force.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very cool. So, and I know we're kind of skipping around here because there's so much to your story and to any story, to any individual who has the experience that you've had. And I would imagine that each one is unique and how they process it. But what were some of the things in your experience that has driven you to be doing what you're doing now? Because you are very active in your volunteering and giving of your time and educating. What are some of the ways that you learned maybe to cope with the cancer until you had the cancer in your past? What were some of those experiences, and what were some of those lessons?
Well, those lessons really were that we can't do it alone. So one of the most revealing days for me was when I showed up at breast cancer support group. And
explain that to me. What's that like?
Well, it's actually pretty scary the first time that you walk in because you really don't know what to expect. So just like they don't hand you a parenting manual, they don't really hand you how to deal with cancer or a heart attack or a stroke manual. You end up having to navigate your way. It's actually a support group of women who are in the same situation that you are in. And the really interesting thing is that our stories are very different but very much the same.
You're obviously an optimist, and you took it on, and I'm going to fix this. But a lot of women probably don't have that type of reaction, and it might be anger. Did you see any of that?
I saw a lot of that. It's anger, it's unforgiveness, because as women, and I think as men, we think, well, we could have done something. Maybe we should have done something to prevent this. Maybe something we did cause this. The other part is families and close friends run in fear. So the other part is at times you go it alone, because those that we call co-survivors, those around us, our friends, our family, our community, are oftentimes more afraid of it than we are. And
I've heard that before. I don't understand that, but I've heard that.
I don't understand that because I've always been someone has a bias for learning and knowledge, and so I knew a lot about cancer. My mom died of leukemia, and had navigated as a co-survivor with her. But yeah, so at times it's relatively lonely, but I would encourage everyone who has a diagnosis to not try to do this alone. I see a lot of women and a lot of men try to do it alone, and my Japanese upbringing is very much move forward and do the best that you can do, but it's behind you and you have to look forward. Oftentimes that's the wrong approach. Oftentimes you need to process through it. And I think one of the ways that I processed through it then was becoming an advocate for others, sharing my story. When you share your story, others are more inclined to share their story, and I've learned that everyone has a story.
And that's been healing for you?
It has been. Even now with a metastatic diagnosis a year ago, it continues to be healing.
Wow. Well, we'll continue the conversation when we come back from the break. You guys stay with us. We'll be right back.
Coming up.
Cancer is a part of me. Cancer is a part of who I am. It was a vehicle that allowed me to unite this community and to say that once we can start doing things for people on a broad scale, we'll start seeing our community continue to be built in a positive way.